Hey everybody, it's Kadesh with Catholic Pipes, and today I have Ben Smith with Redeemed Pipes here to have a conversation with us about what pipe collecting is about and talking from his experience as a collector and as a restorationist of pipes. He's got a lot of insight for us. So Ben, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself a little bit and just kind of tell us a little bit who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Ben Smith with Redeem Pipes. We're here in my little photo studio area, back away from the rest of the mess of my office. Um, and so I uh, buy and sell estate pipes. Also a collector of pipes from lower grades all the way to high grades. Um, so with my business, I also have a full-time job as a business owner. We make some custom downfilled goods for backpackers, and so that is the majority of my time spent. I also have three young kids, and so I don't do a whole lot of restoration personally. Um, I'm up to four people now that are doing restoration for me around the country, and so I may not be as much help to you in that arena as you hope. I'm not sure. Um, but uh, but yeah, I started out with pipes in 2017. Was introduced to them by a few guys in my church that smoke pipes, and um, it grew really quickly for me into a passion. Um, and into a business in 2022. So my first pipe show was Chicago 2022, and that's kind of where I fell in love with dealing with people with buying and selling pipes.
Okay. So you got introduced to, you said, a church, and kind of a similar story too. It was my old youth minister who introduced me into pipes. What was it for you that kind of that stuck? Like, I mean, for a lot of people, they could pick up a pipe and just think, this is not for me. But what about it to you that you were like, I think this is something for me. Like, this is something that might stick.
Yeah, I mean it's the combination of the um, searching for different flavors, tastings. The pipe itself is a really big part for me. The community, um, it all just kind of wrapped together in a bunch of different facets. I think if it was only just the pipe smoking, I'm not sure if I would have stuck with it.
Okay.
But a combination of the collecting side, the artisan side, and then the community really kind of brought it all together in a multifaceted experience.
Yeah, I would say that's something very similar a lot of people experience as well. That's something that I've noticed myself is that, when I got into pipes, I was excited by it because I thought it was kind of cool, maybe a little bit on the edgier side, if you will, doing something old school.
Sure.
Um,
Hipster, hipster side.
exactly. It was more like the hipster thing to do. But I think it, like you said, it was like I was stuck immediately with the idea of like the pipe smoking. I thought that was cool, which led me to kind of like looking at antique shops, not realizing there was a whole community. I think, like you said, it's kind of tiered. You start off with it, you get excited by the different tobaccos, maybe, but you're right. Like after a certain
Mhm.
while, like it might just kind of the enthusiasm might taper off. But once you get thrown into a community, and then you see just how vibrant it is, it just I don't know, like I don't know what's the word, like it just makes it more special. You connect to it more because now you have something I think that links you to other people. You know what I mean?
Right, right, for sure.
And I think that's definitely something I think a lot of people experience. It's not just the pipes, it's once they kind of go into the community, it's eye opening. I think that's kind of why I encourage people, and maybe you do too, great evangelizers of the pipe, where you say come to a show. Because if you've never been to one,
Right,
you're like you're hooked. You're like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be part of. It just makes it come alive. Was that kind of your sense when
right.
you went to your first show that you just your eyes just went wide when you first went to a show?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I've never really experienced a show from the pure perspective of a collector or hobbyist, really.
Hmm.
Since the first show that I went to, I was selling at. Um, but I'm able to, take some breaks from my table here and there and kind of get the experience that a person would get walking around the tables. And yeah, talking to so many different people and seeing so many different things. Um, that's such a mind-blowing experience for sure. And talking about being an evangelist, I was actually just talking to a friend that's in Washington State
Oh, okay.
yesterday about trying to convince him to come to Chicago this upcoming year.
Does he go?
So yeah, it's always fun.
Has he been to the Seattle Pipe Club at all?
I'm not sure. I'll have to ask him.
Yeah, because if that's something that that's also like a good way to get kind of your foot in the door. Is if you can't make it to a show, then getting attached to a local pipe club, if there is one around you, that's also kind of like that first baby step to the wanting to see how much bigger it is. But yeah, it's the second Wednesday of every month. So if he's interested, second Wednesday of every month down at BJ's Bingo Hall in Fife, Washington. That's where it's at. So do let him know.
I'll let him know.
So we go. The shows are a huge part of this. It's where we get to see the pipes themselves. So from your perspective, like or from your journey, you get the pipe. Did you immediately find the artisan world, or did you kind of start off kind of with a lot of us where we start off there and then we kind of go to like antique shops, we try to kind of look around, or did you kind of find that artisan market relatively quick?
I would say it was probably pretty quick for me, since I was already kind of in the artisan world in some other areas. I kind of knew what to look for in that regard, and so I would say, I did start off with lower end stuff for sure. My first half dozen pipes or so were all, under $100 each for sure. Um, and then, but I think it was probably before I hit 10 pipes that I had bought my first artisan, and within the first year or so. And, um, you know, that just opened up a whole new world of, a new facet with the art side, along with the history of estate pipes, and the, craftsmanship, that kind of blends the two together.
Okay. Yeah, that's I think that was very much the and maybe you could speak to this too from a collector side. And like you said, you've done some restoration, but mostly you kind of have other guys who are doing that for you. I think for me, from like at least the artisan thing and a artisan perspective as a maker, and I wonder if you've experienced something different. It's kind of like maybe holding a factory pipe. You like it, you see like, lines are straight, it's a certain shape. Um, I got one like laying right around here, it's like very straightforward. You like it, it's a great smoking instrument. But then for myself, like going to the show and being able to hold, like a pipe from like makers I've been seeing online, there was a different energy about it. Like you hold it up and you're like, whoa, like art comes to mind, like that word when you
Sure.
see it. Like you go from a pipe that, it's straightforward, very stationary, to a pipe that all of a sudden like seems to move in your hand. There's like dynamics going on. It seems like it's moving your hand. There's like, oh yeah, hey, I recognize that guy. Yeah, it was.
Yep. Lots going on with this one.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I remember making that guy. I was super fascinated with the This is I think that was around the time when the blowfish craze was going on, and everyone was doing like the craziest blowfishes they could, like facets and lines everywhere. And I had picked up a
Mm,
Scandinavian pipe maker book. It's like that big one that goes through all the Scandinavian makers from Denmark to Sweden, Norway. Gives a little bio about them and their pictures. And I remember seeing kind of a picture of a blowfish from Iverson, from Lars Iverson, and it reminded me of a story someone told me about how the original blowfish was actually Lars's design, and he had
hmm
came up with it because he had a fish tank, or as the story goes, he had a fish tank that had some blowfish in it, and he was observing them, and he noticed that they liked to eat the little aquatic snails in there. And he saw when they were on the wall,
Mm-hmm.
the fish would kind of charge in and then rapidly curve its body to kind of pull the snail off the window. And so that
Hmm.
movement of the fish at that angle as it's trying to whip itself away is what kind of gave way to his design, which had the teardrop shank and that nice curve to it. And I guess what happened is that he had created a design that had, you know, two flat sides on either, which is kind of like the origin of the blowfish shape, you know, with the bird's eye on either side. So he had done a design like that,
Right.
but his stamp has got like a fish skeleton. And so somebody had associated that the blowfish must be this design that had that stamp on it, but the stamp had nothing to do with the design. And then that's the one that got picked up and everybody ran with. So that was me realizing making a tradition or blowfish that everyone was doing is way too complicated for me at that point because the lines and the facets are so hard to keep track of, making sure that they all loop,
Right.
they follow through at endpoints. So I said, you know what, I'll try a blowfish, but I'll do the traditional style. And somebody had left me some
Mm-hmm.
antler. So I was like, you know what, the antler's got some nice kind of grays and purples to it. So I thought that'd be a really cool end cap piece. And so I try to emulate that Iverson-esque blowfish style in that shape. And it came out with a nice kind of warm brown color, and it paired so well with that antler cap on it. I was really happy with that piece. I loved the lines on it, and I loved how that cap turned out.
And so the style without the panels and stuff, I usually see just called a fish instead of a blowfish,
Yep.
like a Lars fish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But yeah, so like, I mean, as legend goes,
that does have a line that goes all the way to the rim, of course.
yeah, yeah. Now it's just that emulating of the dynamics of that fish, because you know how like obviously you fish like the fish have that kind of like ovaloid shape to it, and so that little
Mm-hmm.
teardrop is to emulate the top part of that fish, where it has that where it all kind of comes together at that rounded point at the top of the fish. But yeah, that's essentially the OG blowfish is right there, and then the one with the panels on the side, that's the one that got picked up, and so this is one that I've had on the bench forever, but it is kind of like a more traditional-esque blowfish with the line on the
Mm-hmm.
side. And it was so funny because I had a hard
Very cool.
time making these guys until I heard something from Todd Johnson. And for those who don't know, Todd Johnson is considered like, I don't want to undersell his credentials, so I'll probably say probably the top North American maker and one of the top makers in the world. Um, he
For sure.
yeah, he said something I thought that was really fascinating, kind of opened my eyes. He said every blowfish is just a volcano shape on its side, and every blowfish is just once again a volcano on its side. So like if you're making a volcano, chances are you could pull a blowfish out of it if you just flipped it on its
Mm-hmm.
axis. And that really kind of opened up my ability to kind of start shaping some blowfish, was the fact that he said something that simple. And I was like, I can't believe I never saw that before until I realized, and I'm like, yeah, one side would be where the tobacco chamber would be on the volcano, and the other side is just the bottom of the volcano, and you're just putting your drill bit right through the center of it, as opposed from the top. And yeah,
Yep.
I have another one here that was exactly the same thing. So this one actually started off. Both of these guys started off as this one started off as a volcano. It was actually going to be
Mm.
like this, I think, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it was supposed to be like this. It was supposed to be like a flat little volcano, and something happened with the design, and
Mm-hmm.
I said, you know what, if I flip it this way, oh, look, there's a blowfish hidden in there. And then conversely, this guy was trying to make a blowfish. You can see from the profile, very blowfish-esque profile for
Right.
that one. But then once again, the shank was misplaced. I said, okay, fine, I'll just turn this one into a volcano. And then
Very cool.
yeah, so then the bamboo came out the side like this. So it was a nice little volcano. But it's that kind of that thought that when somebody can introduce something to you, a new idea, how much more easier shaping or design can become when you kind of help change your perspective and look at it from a different light. Um, so
Yeah.
for you, when you got into,
And blowfish,
yeah,
I was going to say, the blowfish turned into a volcano like that makes it look way more Japanese
yes,
than a standard sort of American volcano might be, with straighter lines and possibly just a sitting base, flat base, and that sort of thing.
I agree. And I
Yeah.
think that was actually part of one of the things I thought was so fascinating about that advice was that it actually opened up more organic shaping. Because if you go in it, like, I almost kind of go in, if I'm going to go to try to make a blowfish, I go in with the mentality of making a volcano. So when I go in there with
Hmm.
making the volcano, I'm able to do all kind of like little, dips or facets on it to make an interesting volcano. But then, like I said, I go and then I flip it on the side, and now I have a really interesting looking, blowfish or volcano, either way you go about it. As long as I try to, if I have the mentality of I'm going to shape this design first, knowing that later I'm going to flip it on its side, allows for there to be, like I said, ways to make it more organic and, like you said, very Japanese in its aesthetic and its approach. Now, for you, you
Right.
said you're going through. You had a bunch of pipes that were under $100. You bought your first artisan pipe. Who was the maker that you bought from? Who had the honor of being your first?
Hmm. Um, I think it might have been an estate, Scotty Pearsall.
Ah, the pencil shank queen.
I Yeah, I was right away. I was fascinated with lightweight pipes, and so even in my first six pipes, I would say, I was looking at some of um, the Peterson, the little small calabash shape and things like that. Um, and so I immediately was drawn towards pencil shanks because of the weight of those. And so Scotty was kind of a natural choice from there to look for. And so yeah, I think it was an estate of hers that was my first artisan. And then also she was my first commission soon thereafter.
Interesting. And what was it that you commissioned from her? Was it like a long shank billiard Bing style, or what did you get from her?
It was actually a more traditional length, probably 5.5 inches, a craggy Dublin.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so a Dublin with plateau on the top, pencil shank about 5 inches long.
That sounds really attractive. I'm very much kind of the same kind of aesthetic where I like about anything under 6 inches in length is where I'll go. The closer you get to six, the more uncomfortable I get to some extent. And this is a great example of
Sure.
that 5.5 inch one because I like to work, with a pipe in my mouth. And so if they're too heavy, I don't like the idea of my jaw slacking, having to put it down. I like the ability to be
Right.
able to keep it there, and even better if they got a little curve to them so they can hang nicely. That's an added bonus. But yes, the light pipes are very there's something about them because you pick up a pipe, you look at it, and it kind of plays mind tricks on you when you go to pick it up, and it's almost kind of like you kind of almost whip it off the table because you're expecting to be a little bit heavier than it is, and then you grab it and you're like, whoa. Like this is kind of an example of like this was probably closer to the 6 inch marker, this little Dublin here.
Hmm.
But still, I mean, this guy is as light can be, and so that's what I think
Right.
really gets you sold on some of those things. And it's funny because in some luxury realms, like weight means something, like you can play with weight, and sometimes the heavier it is, the more expensive. But it seems like in the pipe
Sure.
world, it's almost the opposite. It's like if you can have a pipe that looks substantial, but at the same time be lightweight, it's like that's almost like a good big green flag for a collector, precisely because it's not just a piece of art. There's a utilitarian aspect. Like we got to use it at the end of the day, and so that light
Right.
adds to the function that we as pipe collectors are looking for. We want that functionality. We don't want some do, but I can't speak for everybody. There's some massive pipes that guys smoke, and I'm like, I don't get how that's comfortable or enjoyable when you got guys who got like the tomahawk pipes are like this long, the bowl's like this tall, and you pick it up and it feels like a
Right.
pound. And they're just, I mean, those guys'
Yep.
jaw muscles, because you see them just in their mouth sticking out, and they're no problem talking with it in there. And I'm like, geez Louise, what's the PI
Yep.
on your bite? You know?
Right. And then the other thing with something that's fairly substantial that ends up being lightweight, you can also tell that that was a very quality block of Brier in terms of the age, how much moisture it was able to expel over the years before it was carved, and that sort of thing.
I didn't even think about that. That is actually that's a very good point. I don't think a lot of people realize that too, and that makes sense now why when you see sales from like Vermont Freehand, Steve Norris go on for like 50-year-old Algerian Brier, why they go so fast is because they've already had decades to completely dry out to where the block itself is already relatively light, and then once you whittle it down to the bowl, you've got something that weighs like less than an ounce in your hand. What do you got there?
Right. Yeah, I've got an example of that. Just got this in on a consignment batch, but it's a pretty hefty size Steve Johnson pipe. Pretty good size chamber. About a 2 inch tall bowl.
Yeah, bring it.
Probably 6 1/4, 6 1/2.
There we go.
Sorry, this way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh,
6 1/4, 6 1/2 inches long, and this thing is actually really lightweight for the size. It's amazing when you pick this up how light it actually is compared to something else. I've got this
ooh. Yeah.
volcano here, fairly similar in size overall,
Hmm.
but this one feels almost twice as heavy as this one does.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So it leads me to believe that this was carved with a much more aged block potentially.
Oh wow. Yeah. I love that thin shank on that. Is that a diamond shank on that one or an oval shank?
It's actually sort of a widened hex shank.
Oh.
So I don't know if you can see that, but it's a little bit wider this way, sort of like a Canadian, but it's got a hex panels in it. Well, actually, if I look at it closer, it may actually be octagon panels, maybe 8 panels around.
Oh geez Louise.
Um, and those then flow into the stem as well, panels down the sides and on top and on each
Oh
edge beveled down there.
yeah. I can see that. My goodness. That is some intense detail.
Yeah. But then the bowl itself is just a basic stack billiard, no panels in the bowl itself.
Okay, so all those panels kind of terminate right at the base of the bowl.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Oh yeah, look at that. They just bleed right in and fade out.
Very cool piece. And I don't know much about Steve Johnson. I need to look up his history. Um, as far as I know, not carving anymore, but older American carver, if I'm not mistaken.
I have a buddy who's really big into American carvers, like old American carvers. And I've kind of flipped through some catalogs, and it's really interesting to see. And this is probably something you could speak to as well, because I mean, in your line of work, as your side business with the estate pipes, you get to see a lot of design that probably comes through your hands, through your studio, and from various points in time. That being said, I
Hmm.
think it's really interesting to see kind of what American pipe making looked like back, like, let's say the 60s, 70s, and 80s, before you had this new wave of design that kind of came in. And I could be talking out my butt here, but I feel like Todd Johnson was probably, I could be wrong, but I feel like he was one of the forefathers, him or Jody Davis, one of the two, who started kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
bringing in Danish and other international design into America, which then through their students started proliferating and changing the face of what American pipes look like. I mean, like I said, like that example that you had right there, American Maker. What year do you want to probably say that is? What decade that's from?
I would probably say um, 80s or 90s. I don't think it's old enough to be 60s or 70s. Just what little I
Yeah.
know of Steve Johnson. Um, so yeah, if I had to guess a single decade, it would probably be 90s.
Okay.
And I don't know that, obviously this doesn't have doesn't seem like it has particular Danish or Japanese influence per se.
Yeah.
Um, but let's see, I've got an older American um, freehand
Hmm.
here by Michael Kabik.
It's really,
This was probably in a similar time frame, and that definitely looks more Danish,
yeah.
even a little bit Japanese, really.
Yeah, that's very much of the line of like you would see the old Danish freehands from like for instance who was Eric Nording. That has a lot of very Eric Nording
Right?
vibes to it with the plateau on the top
Yeah.
and then what they would call
Preben
the fancy stem. So you have so I guess like what you could say is there was not really much of a blending going on. You had something that was uniquely American, which it's very hard to kind of nail down exactly what that aesthetic was. But if I had to, from the limited images that I've seen through catalogs, a lot of them there seemed to be a gravitation towards kind of like slender, like kind of more slender designs. I've seen a lot of long
home.
shanked pipes from my friends' collections from from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I've seen a lot of long shanked, a lot of panels, and then the other
Yeah.
side is you have a stark line in the sand that is, if you're going to see any sort of international shaping, it was very much a carbon copy of what the Danes are doing with their free hands. Not much
Right.
of a blending going on per se. And that would make sense if that's from the 90s because I think it was Todd Johnson and I want to say Jody both started in the 90s as well. So this is kind of a little
Right.
bit before the proliferation of this new wave of design that kind of spread through. Um,
And I would say someone that probably bridges that gap is Lee Von Erck.
oh,
Um, so many panels. He does a lot of long, slender shanks, like you mentioned, um, and then has brought in more freehand stuff in recent decades than he used to do. Um, so many interesting techniques with the spirals and that sort of thing.
it's interesting you bring him up because I would say that in terms of like unadulterated, like genuine American design, I think he's the nail on the head in terms of like there being that subtle fusion of some other styles, but it's still very American in terms of what I've seen in the past and looking what I'm doing. It's like he's almost kind of like I would say like in some sense almost the first genuine American artisan who was trying to blend aesthetics together to create his own style, but still uniquely American. Like it keeps a lot of what we would see in terms of that time frame, the designs going on, plus his integration of spirals or unique shaping that's somewhat asymmetrical, and then even his blasting too. Now I don't know if he
Yeah.
was pre JT Cook or not, but he had a blasting style that was very similar to JT Cook, which I thought was also very
Hmm.
fascinating as well. That very rugged, um, like that very rugged, carved out, almost like steps, in his blast.
Sure.
I think that was also like very interesting with Lee Von Erich, but like still being a very American holdout in terms of his aesthetic. Um, that being said, when it comes to like you kind of diving back, diving into the artisan, we started off with Scotty Pearsall. That was your first estate. Then you commissioned her right after. Um, as you start getting into it, what kind of shapes and finishes do you seem to gravitate towards most? I know you have probably a wide variety of tastes because you've commissioned and bought pipes for me, and I can definitively say that while the single unifying aspect was majority, if not all of them, had bamboo, the bowls were all radically different. I mean, let's see. I made you
Yep.
almost like a foot long, Levant with bamboo once. I think it was you that I made you. It was like this long. And
Right.
then I think you bought that really crazy Dublin for me. That the crazy bamboo with the red eye holes and that super jagged blast on it. And then you had
Yep. Yep.
what was it? That reformed Dan shape. Where was that elongated billiard, like
Yeah, that was with bamboo
that 45
as well.
degree
Yep.
angle shank on there? But yeah, each bowl shape was different. The
Yep.
blast was consistent, but the shape was always different. So, what do you?
Right.
We could maybe safely say that you gravitate towards a blast. Um,
Yeah, at least originally, for the first few years, I definitely was almost exclusively blast. But I would say as time has gone on, I have definitely learned to appreciate a great smooth finish. Um, and so while I don't usually commission smooth finishes most of the time, just because a smooth finish has a lot more variation. It seems like of how it can turn out
yeah.
in terms of the grain, and so it usually is when I see a really nice um, smooth is when I'll pick that up. That's already made. But yeah, I would say right now it's probably my collection is probably maybe 30% smooth, 70% blast, with a few rusticators sprinkled in here and there.
What now? What is it about the blast that you find particularly drawn to? And I'll say my 2 cents that for me it might be similar. It's just I like the texture and not only
Hmm.
that, the texture and how it feels in your hand, but I also like the sense of kind of like a certain durability to it. That if I accidentally
Sure.
drop or whatever, like it gets masked in the blast itself. And like here was a billiard that I made not too long ago, but like the blast on this guy is just came out
Great rings.
great rings on that.
Yeah, beautiful.
And for me, like when it came out, I was like I liked the shape of it, but it was just like that, just feeling it. I was like the sensory aspect, like that feels really nice in the hand. It feels very very rugged. Um, in a
Hmm.
similar way, would you say it's kind of similar for you, or is it just kind of like just is it the textural thing? Is it the visuals that it brings about? Like, what was the draw towards the blasts?
Yeah, some of all those things, as well as I would say um, using sort of a natural process to bring something out of the block that you can't immediately see.
Mm.
Exposing a unique texture with a process that's fairly natural in itself. You're just using air to kind of chip away. You're not actually, it's different in terms of rustication, that the sand is not removing the harder wood and it is removing the softer wood. So it's revealing a texture that was already there in the block. You just couldn't see it until you did the process.
Ooh.
Um, so I found that really fascinating. The all the different types. I mean, one of the I enjoy a great ring grain. That's one of my favorite sandblast
Mm.
finishes. But I also really like a very detailed bird's eye blast, where the bird's eye is really stark, and especially with like a contrast on the bird's eye or something, where it really pops out.
Camera was falling a little bit. Yeah, no, I, I I like the way that you said it because I didn't actually think about it from that perspective. Like I've always been fascinated with sandblast, but not until you actually said something that kind of made me realize why I enjoy also making sandblast. It's precisely because that in the blaster itself, I get to see that phenomenon happen in real time. Like as the sand and the air
Hmm.
hits it, I get to watch all the soft wood kind of peel away. And you're right. From my perspective, it is like a little surprise when you get to see Oh, so this was hiding underneath. And especially you get really excited like that billiard I showed you when it just like peels away and just reveals this amazing texture. It's
Right.
very anticipatory and exciting as a maker to go and have everything all taped off. You're ready for blasting, but at the same time you're anxious because you're like, let's see what this is going to what this is going to bring out. You know, let's see what's going to happen because this could take the pipe from being good because let's say the shaping was on point, everything about the pipe, the dynamics, the artistry, asymmetry, symmetry, whatever it is, you're already happy with how the shape came out. And then when you go into the blaster to start peeling away the wood, you're just waiting to see, is this going to elevate the pipe? Is this going to take it to a new level with the texture that comes out? Or is it just going to just, you know, let the pipe be a good pipe? Like I said, the shaping is going to shine through. There'll be some texture, but it's when the real
Sure.
good stuff comes out. You're like, this just took this pipe that was already great or good. It just made it fantastic, you know? And
Right.
in the same way too, it's with the smooths and it's almost kind of that parallel where with the blasting, you're bringing forth something that's hidden that you may not necessarily see with the naked eye, but it's getting brought forth. And I think to your point about, you know, wanting to not really commission a smooth, because the same facet is there, because if it's a really good smooth that was just done organically, the grain is going to complement the shape. And so
Right.
there's that other facet of like when you break into the block, you see the grain and you start shaping, it's what kind of shape can I pull out that's going to maximize this grain or flow with it or add another layer? Because if you've got like some nice swooping lines in your head as you're thinking of designing this pipe, and you can get the grain to match that, it just takes it to a whole
Hmm.
nother level. And it's very hard sometimes to force that process to like, I want this
Right.
particular shape, and then I want the grain to match it. You impose so much of your will onto an organic material that in some ways it can potentially lose some of its beauty. And you've probably experienced this too as you're looking at smooths. There's some that really just knock your socks off. And it's not necessarily like potentially the vibrancy or the color. It's the shaping in combination that you can almost tell that this was a organic process. This block, this pipe just came out of the block. The maker doesn't necessarily have to tell me that that's what happened. I can see it,
Right.
you know?
Yep.
So in that sense, I get why.
Yeah, I really find.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I really find, especially with higher grade factory pipes, especially like Petersons and Savinellis, the higher grade like the Supreme Petersons or a natural Punta Oro Savinelli, something like that. It's got nice grain, but a lot of times the shape is not oriented where it would have maximized that grain. Um, with a Savinelli 320 shape, it's got a patch of bird's eye down on the bottom corner instead of on the very bottom with the straight grain radiating upward. The straight grain is kind of flowing diagonally across the bowl or something like that.
Hmm.
It's pretty. It doesn't have any flaws because of its is a high grade, but you can tell, this shape was not aligned with this grain at all.
Mm.
And that's where an artisan's touch really comes in and taking their time to look at what the grain is going to do before they get into a block like that. I mean, I assume in Savinelli's defense, I assume they're just making 1,000 shaped 320s, and then the ones that have the best grain, they're going to grade a natural Punta Oro or something like that.
Mm.
Um, but you know, in one sense, it was a shame that they couldn't have looked at it a little closer to start with.
And I think that that's also the limitation as well from factory to artisan is that, you know, you have the artisans who are able to essentially freehand. And that was something I thought really
Hmm.
interesting. I was talking to like Chris Asterio, a Greek maker, phenomenal Greek maker, background as an architect, and, you know, takes that same level of precision to his pipe making. And as I was talking to, because like I said, I've been liking the billiards. I've been liking the challenge they present, but also the amount of, there's not a lot of wiggle room, but there still is. And I think that that's kind of also like that skill set gap with an artisan. Like, you have a new maker who's just, making billiards, and they might be good, but then you have an artisan who's saying, you know what, even though there's a standard shape, and for most of the time, the only wiggle room is how long you make the shank or how tall the bowl is, or whether you want that shank to be like oval or, round. There's also the matter of proportion. And able to manipulate proportion allows you to create amazing, visually stunning pipes with such a deceptively simple silhouette. There's still so much you can do if you understand the tolerance levels that you have. And going back to Chris Asterio, the point that I was bringing up, which I thought was interesting, was for him to be able to make his like billiards that have great grain all the way around in the orientation you're talking about, like bird's eye on the bottom, bird's eye on the rim, and then straight grain around. He was saying, I actually go through and I will freehand shape the whole pipe, like the billiard. I will freehand shape it, so that way I can make sure the grain is where I want to. And then I will take it to the lathe and then refine it. And in doing that, I was trying to emulate that process. And I found out was like, that actually works really well. Because then, so I have the tobacco chamber, everything drilled out, I can go ahead and then on the lathe, make a plug for the chamber, and then I can go ahead and secure the chamber. So now just the bowl is spinning, and now I can take my tool and then actually refine the shape, and then conversely put my pin gauge, then put it into the mortise where the shank is, and then refine the shank this way. So then it just leaves me with just small little touch-ups that I have to do for the cheeks and the bottom of the bowl. But that's also the limitation of factories, because they don't have the time to do that. So we take a block, we hope that the block's oriented a certain way, we chuck that into the lathe, and then away we go shaping it. And if it comes out, great. And if it doesn't, if the grain's still good, oh well, it gets marked, as a signature grade or what have you. But that's also the limitation, is that a lot of these guys in the factories, can't remember if it was Peterson, but there's a couple that are relatively handmade, but for the most part, it is chuck the block, get the initial holes and everything all done, but now it's set. You can't move it around anymore. Once your holes are drilled, you're set with the orientation of how you're going to shape that block. There's no more wiggle room.
Right.
And I think that was one of the beautiful things that kind of came out from the Iverson family, as you probably know, but for the listeners as well, back when you had the Danish pipe shops and Sixten Iverson, the great grandfather, you had him working in those shops, and it was the same thing too. You chuck the block and your two jaw chuck, you shape, so you have symmetrical shapes. There might be some wiggle room. And then he's, playing around, has this great imagination, and sees, as the story goes, it was like a horn shape. He sees like the grain, and he sees these lines of like, oh, if I could make a pipe that curved with it, that'd be so great. Only to realize he's limited by the lathe, because I can't shape this on the lathe because of that curve. So what does he do?
Right.
He figures out a way to, use the machinery different. So he shapes it first and then figures out a way to drill it after the fact. And then boom, there is the emergence of this flood of new artistry that the pipe world had never seen before. Simply because somebody had,
Right.
The ingenuity to say, I'm not going to be limited by my tools to limit my imagination. I got to figure out a way to make this thing a reality. And then that opens the door for all of us. And even more interesting is, I mean, think of it like kind of biblically. You think of like Abraham, and like your descendants will number like the stars, like you're going to have so many ancestors. And damn near almost every single pipe maker has been influenced because of him.
Right. Yep.
Not only that, but
in one way or another.
In one way or another, we're all influenced by it. And especially here in America, some of the top carvers who got their start like in the 90s, like we're looking at Jody Davis, we're looking at Todd Johnson. I mean, a lot of these guys went to Denmark. They went to go study with, if it wasn't the Iversons, then they went to go study with, oh shoot, I'm forgetting some of those big names.
Tom Eltang or
Yeah,
Yes Konovitz or
Konovitz, Tom
uh,
Tang went to go study with them, which are
yeah.
part of that ilk. And then they bring this back. And so whether a lot of new makers coming in, it's like they don't realize that even if they're a new maker and they're starting out, they're looking at all these pipes and American pipes and they're trying to emulate them, not necessarily realizing that the aesthetic that they're emulating can trace its way all the way back to Denmark and to Scandinavia,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is so fast. So he himself essentially has descendants, not maybe numbering the stars, but a bunch of descendants just through his pipe making alone and his techniques. He lives on in a lot of us.
Right. Yep, it's great to see, especially with some of the guys that seem to be bringing back some of the, lesser known sexton shapes or the lesser known Jorn Mickey
Mm,
shapes, things like that, the influences that they brought that really seems like they haven't been seen much in the last, you know, 2 or 3 decades, 4 decades even,
yeah.
and really bringing some of those styles back into the forefront with Peewits and um, a lot of the Jorn Mickey influences I see are really in the shank. It's and not as much in the bowl. Um, and you know, looking back and trying to put your spin on some of that stuff that hasn't been seen in a long time really brings back so much more variety into the pipe world these days.
It's funny you say this. Like, I think we see this trend. I think even in just kind of society where we get too much into technology, too much immediate gratification. That you see a switch in culture where then people start going back to tradition. They're like, what's traditional? I want to pick up some stuff that's a little bit slower paced. Where, like in the pipe world, um, there was an apex. I would say back definitely in the 2000s to 2010s. There was like this big surge where you had a very I would say the pipe community was a lot more vibrant back then than it was now, at least on the maker side. So when I first got into pipes, it was in the 2010s, and um I had just started out, but I remember like seeing Instagram just so many pictures of collabs going on. There was collabs every which way, makers going to other makers' shops to work on a special pipe. You had international guys coming on over to Jeff Grasick's shop. He still does that every now and then, but he used to have open seminars. Smoking pipes would have open seminars. There was just so much vibrancy that was going on, and then you see a little bit of a lull, and it kind of followed the tobacco market where, you start seeing, McClellan drop off, and then you see this kind of disinterest happen with the already established group that we had of pipe smokers and collectors. With the tobacco market, you saw a little bit of a disinterest. But then I think as of right
Hmm.
now, we're seeing kind of a little bit more of a resurgence. I'm starting to see some newer and younger guys coming into the maker scene. I'm looking at the shows and I'm definitely seeing some younger faces in the shows as well. You're starting to see this resurgence
Hmm.
that's kind of coming back. And what I think is funny is that from that side of culture, you even see that now in the pipe world too, where you see a lot of guys who are resurrecting old shapes. So like even within an already traditional hobby such as pipe smoking, you still see some of the collectors and pipe makers going back within pipe tradition to resurrect some of these older shapes or designs or thought processes. You see them resurrecting.
Hmm.
So I think that's like kind of fascinating that you see like this idea of going back to tradition. It happens everywhere, even in an already traditional hobby. People are kind of stepping back and seeing what was the foundation of this? What were some of the original shapes? What was hot back in the 80s? Is there a way that I can bring it back with a modern twist? And you see that, I think, really in Adam Davidson's work. Um, his
Yeah.
tool is it's Mick. A lot of the shanks, the stems as well, the saddle design. very Mick-esque,
Mhm.
um, and it's beautiful. It's awesome. I love looking at his table and his work. Unfortunately, his pipes are a little bit out of my price range. I do have a stopping point. My wife told me so. I'm in the $400 to $500 range is what was where I can go. So typically, you'll see me in the estate market a lot, trying to get that. Which for anyone out there, $400 or $500, you might be thinking, "Holy cow!" But when you love something, you'll reach deep into your pockets. You got to discipline yourself. But that's the thing for me is when you go to the estate market though, $400 to $500 could get you something really nice in the estate market. So that's why I always,
Right.
have the cash on hand and kind of keep your eye out on eBay, other makers, see who's retiring to kind of snag something that you really want that you couldn't afford new. But if you're looking,
Right.
you'll find it there.
Yep. That's for sure.
So
Yeah.
what's one of the more unique pieces that you've come across that's come across your line of work that you're like, whoa, this is this is nice.
That is that's a tough one. I mean, I would say probably the number one most unique that I've had is the Smaug dragon carved pipe that I had about probably a year and a half or 2 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, maybe only a year ago. And it was, incredible detail. Um, had the little two tiny, like uh, probably less than 1 millimeter drill lines from the tip top of the bowl inside into the two nostrils, so that you could cap the bowl with your thumb and blow into the stem, and smoke would come out of the nostrils while you were smoking it.
That is cool.
But they were small enough that they didn't interfere with any airflow or anything like that while you were actually smoking it. But um, yeah, such a cool pipe. It's hard to say in terms of more traditional styles. I've seen um, so many different things from, I've got a half dozen Todd Johnsons right now, um, and some of his signature styles that are just mind blowing. Just listed a fantastic Wolfgang Becker that you don't really see that type of a shape from many other people, with that sort of wasp style shank. But yeah, it's hard to say. I've got so much inventory of really cool stuff, um, that it's hard for something to stand out, I guess. Um, but yeah, Eskimos, blowfish, volcanoes, all sorts of crazy shapes.
Oh man. Well, if you had any advice, this might be a difficult one. Let's say you get a guy who's
Hmm.
just getting into pipes, all right? And we're of the perspective that in order to keep this community alive and going, we need to start getting guys from going from the basket pipes, which is nothing wrong to, but helping them develop a sweet tooth for the artisan stuff. What advice would you give for somebody to start kind of looking at the artisan market, to no longer kind of maybe scoff at the pricing, but actually take it seriously? Like what would be from your experience, like the way to kind of start appreciating those artisan pipes a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, um, two two ways that immediately come to mind that are, I guess, really vastly different from each other. One that you kind of already mentioned with the estate market, where you can be able to appreciate someone's work without the full price tag. That's great to be able to find a $400 or $500 pipe new, that for 200 or 250 that may be more in budget for people. And there's some artisan carvers out there that are in the even $150 to $200 range, new, that you can start learning to appreciate the differences
Mm.
between a handmade and a factory. So just get something that's artisan made so you can know the difference in the stem, the difference in the finish, where you can, tangibly see those differences. And then from there, trying to think what my second reason was going to be. Um, you know, a lot of these guys are, this is their job, this is their livelihood. They're supporting themselves and their families. And if it takes 10 hours or more to make a single pipe from start to finish, if you were working for 10 hours for your normal job, whatever it is, what would you expect to get paid for working for 10 hours? And, so for some people it's more, some people it's less, but generally it's going to be at least, $150, even working at McDonald's these days for 10 hours. Um, and, working at an office job, that may be 350, $400, or more. So, for these guys to be able to make a livelihood, that's the price they have to charge to feed their families. Um, and but being able to save and actually support these guys, you know, makes it so the artisan side of things can continue. Because if we don't have the people that are supporting the artisans, they have to go back and look for more other jobs. Cut back to part-time hours, things like that, and that lessens the thriving of the community. The part-time guys generally are not going to be the ones that are doing the collaborations, that are doing the studies in the old-time great masters of pipe carving. Um, so yeah, I mean it's very nuanced for sure, but I'd say if you're just getting into pipe smoking, it's worth doing what you can to at least get one artisan pipe in your collection.
That I like your explanation because you hit it from both sides, and I think that's actually 100% true. It's when you look at the price tag for what it is, you have to realize that when you go to like trades work as well, if you need some welding done and you want to make sure it lasts, you're going to pay
Hmm.
quite a bit more per hour than somebody right out of trade school whose work might fail. And so you're going to end up paying less for that to get the job done, but you're not going to end up with the quality. And that's the one thing I've noticed with
Sure.
even my own pipe collecting is, and that's why I do it, is I love to study the pipes. Every pipe has a story in my collection, a friendship attached to it. I personally don't buy a pipe just because. I buy it if I've got a connection to the
Hmm.
person, that I've had a beer with them, or maybe they've given me advice on my own pipe making. And then that's when I start saving up, because in a way it's like I want to support you, but I also want
Hmm.
some of your art. I want to have a pipe from you to add to my collection, so that way when I smoke my pipe, it's much more than just smoking. It's a recollection. It's nostalgia. It's a reminder of that
Hmm.
friendship. It's a reminder of that journey. And so I think that's the other facet too with pipes. It's like they're so much more than just an object. They are really timeless pieces that remind us of a better time. They take us right back to where we were when we met. Those laughs, or whatever it is. And to the part about finding in the estate market's really good. I think that what would be really cool is for everybody listening, if you are dabbling, you've been in pipes and you want to upgrade, I think one of a fun little challenge would probably be to get on Instagram, get on where the pipe makers are, follow them, find a maker that you really like, and then set a goal. I'm going to find one of this person's pipes on the estate market. Make it a hunt,
Sure.
find them, see the guys you like, and then go to the Smoking Pipes estate side, smokingpipes.com. Look at the estates. Be ready for the federal holidays when they have 10% off their estates. Go to eBay, follow, pipe sellers on there, but, make it a game, make it fun. Find artisans that you like, and then challenge yourself. Can I get a steal and find their work on the estate market? And let that be the crown jewel of your collection. I got myself a
Sure.
Yeti. I got myself a J. Allen. You're not going to believe the price that I paid on it. That's that's the fun of it.
Right.
And then it gets you to that point to where you're kind of like, I've been admiring estates. Maybe it's time for me to pull the trigger and actually take a look into the commission process and see if I can have one made to my tastes from this artist who I've enjoyed their aesthetic for quite a while now,
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that was,
Yeah. Or well, I was going to
yeah.
say, or reach out to me. I've got a stockpile of over 1,000 pipes here that need to be sold, and I've got probably 300 of those are artisans. And if you're looking for something specific, let me know. I just had a J Allen come in yesterday. Actually, two. One Magnum J Allen and a J Allen Vladimir Grichukin collaboration.
Those are fun pieces. I remember that collaboration.
Yep.
That's a great idea. So what I'll probably do is I'm gonna put the link to both your outdoor and the redeem pipe stuff in the description. So if you guys are looking for anything for outdoors, or if you're looking for pipes and you want to get into the game a little bit with the artisan world, Ben's your guy. I'll put a link so you can get in contact with him and have some fun, see what you can find. Because I've seen at least a fraction of what he has at the shows, and he has some stellar pieces at great, reasonable prices for the estate market. He's the guy to go to, really, if you're trying to beef up your collection or start off by adding something nice and artisan. Ben's definitely the guy you should go with. So I'll make sure I put a link to all of your points of contact in the description so that my listeners can come follow, because I know I've seen in the comments section a lot of people asking about pipes, pricing, the whole shebang, and I need someone to point them to. If they're not ready to pay the prices that I charge for my stuff, I want to be able to say, like, but I don't want you to get discouraged in being able to get your hands on an artisan pipe. And so it's great to have you on board so that they can go to you and just say, what do you got? What can we do with this budget? And you be able to be that connoisseur. I always forget. There we go. Look at that. They're calling your name.
So this is my bin specifically of artisans that are less than $150. So that's my current selection of artisans under 150. So roughly at least 30 pipes in that bin.
Oof. All right, guys. If you guys' mouths aren't salivating and your wallets aren't quivering just yet, they will. So, well, hey Ben, I enjoyed this conversation. There was some great information in here. I'm excited to start pushing people your way to help them get their hands on their first nice pipe handmade from you. And I look forward to seeing you at the Muletown show in Tennessee. So for all of you guys who didn't make it, is Tennessee. It's a phenomenal show, phenomenal venue. You get to meet me. You'll be able to get to meet Ben. You'll be able to meet him and get that connoisseur experience in person, meeting him. So make sure you're there, guys. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate your time.
Yep, it was a pleasure. Good talking with you, Kadesh.
Yeah, you too, amigo. All right.